I can't remember what contest it was, and they moved over to California. And between the last time we saw each other and today, she lost her life. Because some crazy fan shot her dead in Florida. Of course, when I say Florida, most of us think of these guys. Or maybe you don't think of these guys because you may have never seen these guys. These are the 49 people that were murdered in the nightclub in Orlando. They all had names. They all have faces. You know, I'd just like to say something about this. Because if these 49 men and women came to church this morning, some of us would feel a little uncomfortable. Because the nightclub, of course, that they were murdered in was part of the LGBT community in Orlando. And many of us have an ambiguous relationship with those communities. But you know, the Lord didn't ask us to draw circles and borders around groups of people. When Jesus told his disciples to wait in Jerusalem until they had received power, he told them, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem. And the disciples were like, yay! In Judea. And the disciples were like, yo, that's our people, right? These are our peeps. In Samaria. Yo, Jesus, hold on a second. That's not part of our faith. No. These Samaritans, they live lifestyles that we don't agree with. Huh? But it's part of the commission. And the disciples were not given the commission to walk into Samaria and say, yo, you're wrong. They were simply given the commission to show the love of God to anybody and everybody that they met. Whether they were Jews from Judea or whether they were heathens from Samaria. And for church people, there is your Samaria. Because the way we treat members of the LGBT communities, and I say communities because that's a variety of people and communities in there. It's not just one big old block. But the way we treat these guys is the same way that the Jews treated the Samaritans. Anyway, let me move on because more has happened since then. So then I woke up one morning. Well, actually, I didn't go to sleep that night because I watched the results live on BBC Online, the Brexit vote. Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot. It's the North American church I'm preaching to. So there's this place called Europe, right? It's on the other side of the Atlantic. And that's where I grew up. Yay. And I grew up in Germany, which is part of the European Union, and then I moved to England, and there was free travel for me, and I was able to live and work in England because of part of the European Union. But then, of course, Britain decided to have a referendum on whether they want to stay in the EU, and the result of this referendum was that the majority wanted to leave. They wanted to leave, right? Oops. They wanted to leave. What happened here? Yeah. Slim, but enough for everybody to panic and for the pound to lose lots of value, and now my savings are worth a little less than they were before the vote. All this happened since the last time we met each other. And then this, the attack on the airport in Istanbul, in Turkey. Yesterday I was looking at my Twitter feed, and then I started watching some documentaries because on the 1st of July, 1916, during the First World War, 1st of July was the first day of what is known as the Battle of the Somme, where the Allied, mainly British forces, were trying to break through the German lines. And on that first day, 100 years ago, on that first day, on the 1st of July, 1916, over 19,000 British soldiers lost their lives. One day. 19,000 in one day. And that doesn't count the wounded. If you count the wounded, that's almost 60,000 people In one day. When this battle finished in November of 1916, over 1 million people had died or were wounded. And what happened? And what was the glorious result? The lines moved from here, literally, to here. On that first day, 19,000 people died and nothing happened. No breakthroughs, no movements. And this morning, as I was fiddling around with this presentation and putting on the finishing touches, I saw this. 20 people were killed in an attack on a cafe in the diplomatic quarters in Dhaka in Bangladesh. So when we read in Matthew 24 about the signs, in Matthew 24 is this famous chapter of the signs of the times. Especially us good Adventists we've taken this in with our mother's milk. And I know that because I was born into the church. I've heard this from when I was, And every time something happens, we're like, whoa, yay. And signs are important. But let's look at what was the background, the background in front of which Jesus actually gives that answer in Matthew 24. Well, the background is that Jesus is in the temple one last time. Jesus is arguing with the religious leaders, my colleagues, in that temple one last time. Jesus is using harsh language to try and finally get through to those leaders, my colleagues, one last time. The only time Jesus uses harsh language, by the way, was when he was talking about me and my colleagues. Yeah, take that, Westboro Baptist Church. So, and they didn't listen, and so Jesus is finally leaving, and he's making a pronouncement. At the end of Matthew 23, he says, your house is left unto you desolate, empty. Now that's cryptic and scary language, because wasn't it God's house? Didn't he say, my Father's house is supposed to be a house of prayer? But now he says to these leaders, your house, your crib is going to stay empty. And the disciples were like, okay, that's a bit weird. So as they were leaving the temple compound, which was probably a very glorious structure, they called to Jesus' attention all this marvelous building. And in Matthew 24, verse 1 and 2, Jesus is saying, not one stone here. You see all this beautiful temple, but not one stone is going to be left on top of another. In other words, all of this beautiful temple, all of it is going to be razed to the ground. And so now, in verse 3 of Matthew 24, the disciples are coming to Jesus and ask him the question, so tell us then, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And you heard me say this before. You see, to the Jewish disciples, and they were Jewish, to these disciples, the destruction of the temple, the coming of the Messiah, and the end of the world was one and the same event. The temple cannot be destroyed. If the temple were to be destroyed, that would be the end of the world. And so they ask him this question, and Jesus answers the question in Matthew 24 and 25, answers the question, and he's mixing his answer in the same way that the disciples had mixed the question. So there were two events in Matthew 24 that Jesus is pointing to: the immediate destruction of Jerusalem, and more long-term, the history of humanity and the end of the history of this world as we know it. And so, of course, when we look at Matthew 24, we try to distinguish, well, which belongs to what, right? So make sure you don't flee on the Sabbath. We say, well, that was when the Romans came and surrounded the city, and then they left for a little while, and before they came back, everybody who remembered Jesus' words got out of there and ran into the hills, and good thing they did, because when the Romans came back, there was no more escape until the town and the city of Jerusalem was completely destroyed. And Matthew 24 has become famous for these signs. And we who've heard this over and over and over and over and over again, as soon as something happens, and you've seen in just 1 month what happened, we all sometimes, when Britain voted, not only did the market lose their mind and the pound dropped and everything dropped everywhere. No, I think our church also had a moment of collective losing of mind. Everybody was screaming, Daniel 2, Daniel 2, about the toes and the feet that are clay and iron. And they said, you see, the Brexit vote is in direct fulfillment of that prophecy, because they shall not cleave to one another. I'm not quite sure if God had the European Union in mind when he told Nebuchadnezzar about that statue. And I don't think that the United Kingdom is... You have to be careful because there's a string online, right? I didn't hear any other European Adventists comment on this with Daniel 2. Only English-speaking Adventists were screaming Daniel 2. As if the United Kingdom constitutes such a large part of Europe that its breaking away would therefore destroy the entire Union. Not quite sure if the United Kingdom is that important. Anyway, but that's besides the point. We love signs. We Adventists love signs. We love it because we are an apocalyptic, or I should say, we are a church with a very strong apocalyptic teaching component, end time stuff. And so whenever something happens, we're like, whoa, signs, signs. But here's the thing. Are signs really that important? Well, yes, of course they are. Okay, yes, they are. Imagine, right? When we drove here this morning to church, we obeyed a lot of signs to get here. We all did. Well, those of us who drove obeyed, hopefully, a lot of signs on our way. Either the ones that are on a stick and made of metal, or the ones painted on the road. That's why we all sit here. That's why we didn't crash head on into the oncoming traffic, because we stayed on our side of the road, because there's a sign on the road that divides the traffic on that side going in that direction from the traffic on our side going in this direction. And we didn't all bump into each other sideways because there were other signs on the road marking out lanes, and so we stick in each other's lanes. We stick to our lane and keep the other people in their lane. And then there were lights and signs that that told us when to stop, to let other cars go in front of us, and when to move on so that we could go. And they had signs to tell them to stop. So signs are important on the road. They give directions. If this is your first time here, you followed your GPS or you followed the instructions of your friend, and they told you at this particular street you turn, and so when you saw the street sign, you turned. If you came from further, you were on 295, and then you were told, get off at exit 34, and then go on Route 70 West, and then you turn right onto Cooper Landing, and then you're here. And if you came from the north, well, then you might have taken a slightly different route. Anyway, we follow signs because they give directions. We follow signs because they warn us of dangers. If you dig a hole here, there may be a sign, no, don't dig here, because there may be an underground cable. So if you ignore that sign, then, nice to have known you. And signs provide information. Some of you may actually, after today, get on the road to visit folk for the long weekend, and you appreciate the little green markers on I-95 when you go south that tells you how far you're still from the Delaware Memorial Bridge, or when you get to Maryland. Delaware is really just 10 minutes, isn't it? But when you get to Maryland, and then you count down, so you know that the DC area is in a particular number. So you count the distance, at least I do. Keeps me awake. Signs are important. And in Matthew 24, verses 6 to 8, we have a collection of signs. And they're good, and they are important. And so, as Adventists, we take the signs, and this is, of course, not the only collection of signs. There are other signs in Revelation, and we have books full of signs written by other people. And so every time something happens, we're like, yo, the signs. But here's the thing. Everything I just said and the importance of signs and how we react to them would be good and proper if Jesus had stopped in chapter 24, sort of in the 30s. If that was it, if Jesus had said, well, here's the signs, make sure you listen, you look out for them, and done. And that's it, no more. Then yes, then I would now say, well, you do the same, well done, good church, whenever something happens and dignitaries come to visit and of a certain religion, and we all like, whoa, sign. Good, then we would be right. But here's the thing. Jesus didn't finish there. You see, there is something more important than the signs in Matthew 24. In fact, the 3 verses that we read in chapter 24, verses 6, 7, and 8, Jesus he gives the collection of signs that we put so much emphasis on. Wars and rumors of wars and pestilence and earthquakes and this, that, and the other. I've heard evangelistic sermons, man, and there was like a long list of how many earthquakes since 1950. And how that has gone up, and you see how the signs are being fulfilled. And the thing is, we forget how Jesus concludes this collection of signs. He said, don't worry about that. That's just the beginning. Ain't not even the end. It's just labor pains. King James and his happy translators, they tried to stay away from all this slightly delicate imagery. But really, it's labor pains. And some modern translations actually do translate it that way. These are merely labor pains. Ladies, those of you who have children, when you were pregnant, at the end of your pregnancy, when the labor started, I know it's hard to then take your mind off it when you're in it. But when you look back now, what's more important? The labor or the birth? Or that crazy child next to you? See, so Jesus is saying the signs are just labor pains. Don't get too hooked on those things. Because ladies, I can talk about labor all day. Because, I'm, of course, a man who doesn't have to go through this. But you wouldn't want me to do that, because those of you who've been through this are like, okay, Pastor, even now, you're pushing the envelope right now. Because I don't really want you to continue to talk about labor, because that was really, really painful, and you have no idea. So would you please just shut? Okay. Jesus says, the signs, as important as they may be, are not that important, because there's something even more important than the signs. And why am I saying this? Because if we look at his treatment of the end in Matthew 24, in its entirety, which goes beyond chapter 24, we see that the signs take up only a small portion. Small portion. So Jesus says, no, that's just labor pain, don't worry. The entirety is chapters 24 and 25. And while signs are important, looking at those two chapters, we notice something even more important, and that is to be ready. And there is an important distinction. Let me come back to the car. You see, knowing traffic signs helps me to navigate and drive without causing accidents. Well, hopefully anyway. But knowing the signs will not put gas in my tank. Knowing the signs won't put the right inflation into my tires. Knowing the signs won't make me a better driver. It does nothing for my character behind the wheel. The only thing that does that is to be ready. So I go to get my gas before I go on a road trip. Make sure that the needle is in the right part of the gauge, right? Make sure that the tires are inflated properly. Hello? It's a good thing. Not just because you don't burn as much gas, but you don't want to blow out somewhere in northern Maryland with nothing around you but trees. Or worse still, on that big long bridge on 95, right? And then you blow out up there. And all between you and the abyss and water is this sort of concrete barrier that doesn't look like, I don't want to hit that. So being ready is more important than knowing the signs, although that too is important. But it won't get me where I want to go unless I'm ready. And so Jesus spends more time. In fact, if you look at the text, he spends a lot more time on being ready. So it starts in chapter 24, verse 42. He says you have to keep watch. Therefore keep watch, because you don't know on what day your Lord will come. That verse introduces a string of illustrations and parables. Its first illustration is that of the thief. You don't know when a thief comes to break in. Because if you knew that the thief was coming, you'd be there waiting with your baseball bat. Sorry, you'd be waiting there, with the church manual to bless them. In fact, you'd just be there with the lights on. This is followed by the wicked servant. A wicked in this, of course, is not like wicked, you know what I mean? No, this is like bad guy. No. Thank you, Michael Jackson. This was a very nasty character. He beats his fellow servants and so forth because he thinks, my Lord isn't coming for a long time. Party! And then the Lord appears unexpectedly, and the servant is in trouble. And now we come to chapter 5, which contains only 3 more illustrations. The first one is the 10 virgins. The next one is the parable of the talents, and that is followed and concluded by the illustration of the sheep and the goats. In all these, God is trying to teach us something, and we're going to have a quick look at all of them. And what he is trying to teach us is that signs are good, but being ready is better. So let's have a look at these. So the thief, the illustration of the thief is to tell us that we need to keep watch. And that's where signs may be helpful, to remind us, to remind us. He's given us these signs and he's saying, it's like the farmer looking out and sees that certain things are happening in nature. So he knows, back in those days, okay, summer is about to happen. I mean, all we do now is we go to our apps and we pull up a weather app and we know exactly what's going to happen in the next 5 days. We hope that they get it right anyway. So Jesus is telling us, I'm giving you a couple of signs to help you to stay awake and to be watchful, so that you don't get surprised. Don't think this is not going to happen for a while. Because the second coming of Jesus really is only as far away from you as your last breath. Because when we die, the next moment we know is Jesus coming again. So we need to keep watch. And let me say this again. Keep watch doesn't mean that you need to go through the news stream with a fine tooth comb and try to fit anything and everything on there to a Bible text or to a chapter or paragraph in the Great Controversy. That's not the point of keeping watch. If you do that, you will neglect your own personal development and you end up a very dry, sour-faced person. And the problem with that kind of attitude and character is that your knowledge of science is not really what is required to enter heaven. Being like Jesus is that requirement. And we don't get that by running through the news stream, trying to match this with that and that with that. And then while we're at it, berating our Catholic work colleague about worshipping the beast. See, I think the reason why Jesus was telling us about the wicked servant who beats his fellow colleagues because he thinks the Lord isn't coming for a while is to tell us, good church people, that we need to be nice. I gave this at camp meeting, this presentation. That's why I had to try and keep it really short. To be like Jesus is to be nice. To have the character of Christ includes being nice. If you're not nice, you may not have the character of Christ. Because you can't be like Jesus and not be nice. You can be nice and not have the character of Christ. There's people who can do that, yes. But you cannot be a follower of Christ and not be nice. That's impossible. That's impossible. And I'm still on that learning curve. Trust me. So if you're with me, you may not have the same issues that I have, but we're on that learning curve. And trust me, I've seen Adventists not be nice. They are like that wicked servant beating each other up over whether women can be pastors or not, or what kind of clothes are acceptable in the church, and what kind of music is acceptable in the church, or what kind of ingredients must be in your fridge, and which one, more importantly, should not longer be in your fridge. I've seen Adventists turn nasty on all this small fry stuff. Really? If God calls my fellow female pastor to pastoral ministry in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I will stand back and say, God bless you. Who am I with my big old TV ministry to say, no, you can't do that? Talking to you, Doug. Be nice. Be nice. Some of us think that the 10 virgin parable is about don't sleep in church. You see? They all fell asleep, and then bam! The bridegroom comes, and all is pandemonium, and they're left out, and I never knew you because you fell asleep in church. Yeah, but that's not what the parable is about. Falling asleep is a natural reaction to a delayed bridegroom, and is presented in the parable as neutral. It just happened. There's no further meaning in this, other than something happens to all these virgins, all 10 of them, the wise and the foolish, and what happens to them brings out the real point of the parable, and that is being prepared, having reserves. So this is not about sleeping in church or being lethargic in your spirituality. No, the sleep may very well just present or represent a crisis or something that befalls all 10 of them, even the wise ones fell asleep, by the way. So this befell all 10 of them, but what it did is it brought out who had enough oil and who didn't. The point of the 10 virgins is, you got enough oil? You got any oil at all? Come on, man. 1844 was what? Come on, you mathematicians. 172 years ago. There you go. Right? Close enough. 170 plus. 150 plus change. Oof. Long time. I'm 50 years old. And when I was a little boy, they told me, Jesus is going to come soon. And the only thing that kept me from falling over the cliff of that kind of craze is that my dad, my father, was told not to pursue a certain career because Jesus would surely come before you finish, man. So he didn't. And he told me that when I was young and says, listen, don't listen to that kind of talk. You do what God puts you to do. My parents, especially my mom, they have a Lutheran background. And so, I have, not just because I'm German, but also through that, a slight affinity to Martin Luther. And Martin Luther was said to have said that even if he knew that tomorrow the world would end, he would still plant his apple tree today. So even if I knew that Jesus is going to come by the end of the year, I'd still sign up for university today. I would still do what God gives me to do. Because we don't know when he's coming back, right? What we do know is that there may be a delay. And when the delay happens, or when crisis happens, do we have enough oil to get us through that? Have we got enough Holy Spirit in us? Do we spend enough time with God, not just on the 7th day, but on all of the 7 days that make up the week? Do we allow God to fill us with himself? Because we are the temple, we are the sanctuaries of God on planet Earth right now. We are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Individually in 1 Corinthians 6, but also collectively in 1 Corinthians 3. We are the temple. And God has some choice words for those who want to destroy that collective temple. I'm off script. Let me come back. Come back. Do we have enough oil? You see, these are the parables that Jesus, let me just throw this in, a little commercial break here. Having talked about the end time, Jesus is now telling us what to do and what to look out for while we wait. While we wait, keep watch. While we wait, be nice. While we wait, make sure you got oil. While we wait, use the gifts that I give you. Don't be like that servant that was given one and you think, oh, all I got was one? Really, Jesus? Janitor in the church? Are you serious? I've got so much more to offer. No, you got that gift from God, use it. You see, the problem with that third servant in the parable is not that he misused the gift. The problem was that he didn't use it. God doesn't want us to not use it. He'd rather we try something and, need a bit of improvement while we try, rather than not to do anything at all. While we wait, use your gifts. Use your gifts. But Lord, Pastor, the Lord hasn't given me any gifts. No, sir. If you read 1 Corinthians 12, he gives everyone. Just as he determines. Not what you want, not what I want. Trust me, there are plenty of times in the day that I'm like, Lord, really? And the Lord says, no, it's okay, keep going. Carry on, Schnell. No, use your gifts. And if you don't know it, ask him. I mean, he's the one who's giving it, right? So you can ask him. And he'll tell you. And he will also give you enough courage to use them. And then finally, we have the sheep and the goats. And here's the thing. You see, the key point of that final parable, while we wait, the key point of that distinction between those on the, those on the right and those on the left, talking to you now. The key distinction between them is that one showed compassion and the other one did not. Come, you beloved by my Father, enter into a kingdom, because when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was sick, you came and saw me. They're like, what? When did we do that? Because we never saw Jesus, in prison. Last time I went to the hospital in Mount Holly, there was no Jesus lying in the bed. Jesus hungry? What? Thirsty? Jesus streaking? Come on, man. What's going on? And Jesus is telling them, inasmuch as you've done it to one of the least of these, my brothers and your brothers and sisters, of these, my children, you've done it to me. And the exact same, only the opposite, happens to the ones on the other side. You need to depart. I don't know who you are. You will be lost forever. Because you did not feed me. You didn't give me something to drink. You didn't clothe me. You didn't visit me. You didn't care for me. You showed no compassion. And again, they're like, when did we do that? Or, well, didn't do that. And Jesus says, well, whenever you didn't show that to the least of these. And let me just throw a little side spanner here. On my timeline, I have a couple of gay and lesbian Adventist friends. Those are the least in our church right now. Oh yeah, you want me to speak about the homeless, the poor. If we had a transgender individual right here, you'd all come up with some Bible texts and try and pray over them. These are the least. If we had a refugee from Syria here who hasn't converted yet to Christianity, Muslim, with his wife who's wearing the headscarf, we'd be all like, Last time we made fun of the undocumented workers in the United States because they don't speak any English. Yo, that's the United States, right? No español. Inglés, huh? There's plenty of the least of these, my brethren, in our sphere of influence. And for some of us, yes, it's that Catholic neighbor of yours. Show compassion. That was the single criterion that Jesus is using in the final parable of telling us how to prepare and be ready while we wait. The single criterion that decides whether they go one way into eternal life or the other way into eternal death. To show compassion. So, whatever way you vote, and you know that your brother in church votes the other way in November, you have to show compassion to them too. If you hate your brother just because he's got an Obama sticker on his car, or you hate them because they have a Trump sticker on their car, you're not showing compassion. Because in Christ, all that doesn't matter. You have to show compassion to each other. And this is what Jesus spends most of his verbiage, most of his talk, most of his breath on in Matthew 24 and 25. Not the signs, just labor pains. No, be ready. And we are ready when we keep watch. We are ready when we are nice. We are ready when we have enough oil. We are ready when we use our gifts. And we are ready when we show compassion. So the next time I'm tempted, to have my little eschatological craze attack, I need to remember this. The Lord spent a lot more time on being ready, telling me how to be ready, than trying to mix and trying to match a news article to some paragraph here or there or there. Keep watch, be nice, have oil, use gifts, and show compassion. May God bless us, Cherry Hill, as we strive to be ready. To be ready. Because we have this hope that one day he who shall come will come. And he won't delay. We have this hope that one day we will look up and we say, lo, this is our God, and he has come to save us. We have this hope. We have this hope that burns within our hearts. And until that hope becomes reality, let us be ready. See what I did there? Perfect dovetail into the closing hymn, which is 2:14. We have this hope that burns within our hearts. So as we sing this hymn to close, sing it with this conviction in your heart. It's not just, I want to see Jesus come. Of course I do. But until then, Lord, make me ready. Make me ready. Let us stand as we close with this song.